Beshno az nechon hikayat mikonad, az jodaya shekayat mikonad. Kaz neistan chon mara bobride and, az nafiram mard ozan nalide and. Listen to the song of the reed in its weeping, for it tells the story of our separation. For since the day the reed was torn from its riverbank, in its sorrow is heard the cry of every man, of every woman. Once there was a hoopoe bird that flew away to a faraway kingdom where it found a palace of diamonds and pearls. The hoopoe bird landed on the windowsill of that palace, and when it looked through, it saw a queen lying on a divan, looking aimlessly into the empty space. The hoopoe greeted the queen, saying these words, "E Bilkis, O queen of the morning, I come from a distant kingdom to bid you greetings from the king, my king, a king so powerful that he has subdued all the div and jinn, a king so wise that he has learned all the languages of the birds and the animals, a king so wise that this very king taught me the language of women and men, the language with which I speak with you. I come to pass greetings of my king, known to the world as Soliman, King Solomon." And at those words, Queen Bilkis turned to the hoopoe bird and asked it this, Tell me then, O enchanted bird, what tribute would your king ask of me?" And at that question, the hoopoe replied as follows, "O queen of the morning, my king asks of you no other tribute except your presence. My king asks of you no other tribute except that which draws you towards him." And with those words, the hoopoe flew away. But the queen was distracted at the visit of this hoopoe bird and its strange words. And so at once she called one of her servants, one of her ambassadors, saying to him, Go now into my treasury and collect 40 mule loads of gold. Carry those 40 mule loads of gold to that distant kingdom that has as its king Soliman, King Solomon the Wise. And so at those words, the queen's ambassador made all the arrangements. He gathered those 40 mule loads of gold and made sure the finest mules in the stables would be carrying this tribute to that king from that distant kingdom known to the world as Soliman. And the journey was long, across many deserts, many valleys, until the queen's ambassador arrived in the domains of King Solomon. And what he saw there amazed him. For in this kingdom, all the fields were covered in gold. In this kingdom, all the roads were paved in pure gold. In this kingdom, all the trunks of the trees had gold filigree, and the trees bore fruit that was of pure gold. And as he came closer to the palace of King Solomon, he became more and more embarrassed, saying this to himself again and again. Here I come with this tribute of 40 mule loads of gold. But what value could such a tribute be in a kingdom where everything is gold? And yet still, the ambassador mustered his courage to make his way to the palace of King Solomon. And there he stood before King Solomon on his golden throne. And the king saw all the embarrassment in the ambassador's face. The ambassador could barely look him in the eye, always sheepish, always looking askance. But at this, the king only smiled at the ambassador. Go back to your queen, he said to him. Go back to your queen and explain to her that in my kingdom, the only gold has no value. For there's one thing that I value above gold, and that is the presence of your queen. There is one thing I value above gold, and that is what draws your queen towards me. And so the ambassador spent a few days looking at all the wonders in Solomon's palace, seeing even further wonders in this kingdom he had never known could ever exist in this fleeting world. And then he returned. And when he was before Queen Bilqis, he gave to her Solomon's answer. And he explained to her all the wonders he had seen in that kingdom. And then some time passed. The queen spent all her days sitting on that divan, looking aimlessly into the emptiness around her, until a morning came when that same Hoopoe landed on her windowsill. And the Hoopoe turned to the queen, saying this, After you have received tidings of my king, you still remain here. After you know the tribute that my king seeks of you, you have not made one step, one effort to satisfy him. And to this the queen turned to the Hoopoe bird, saying this, O sweet Hoopoe bird, indeed all these past days, all these past weeks, I could think of nothing else but the answer from your king. I could think of nothing else but the thought of perhaps making a journey and paying a visit to your king. But every time I had this thought, there was always something that was holding me back. And then there came a day when I was resigned that I could part with my companions, my female companions who joined me in the bath every morning. I could part with my handsome page boys who served me all the day long. I could part even with my riches and my palace. But there was one thing that I could not resign myself to part with, and that was my throne. For I thought to myself, where would I be without my throne? How would I know myself without my throne? What name would I call myself without my throne? And yet my throne is so heavy, laden with jewels and pearls, a throne made of marble so heavy that no human could move it. And so it was my throne that has kept me here all this time. And then the Hoopoe replied to the queen by telling her this story. Once there was a man who climbed up a walnut tree that had branches that grew over a deep chasm, at the bottom of which there was water going through rapids. But as he climbed up the tree, he did not reach for the walnuts, but rather he shook the branches, shook them so vigorously that the walnuts fell from the branches and fell deep into the chasm, landing in the water with a plop, 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 plop. And as the man was doing this, another man who was passing by saw the man in the tree, and he cried out, "Are you a fool? Don't you see what you're doing? You're shaking the branches. How will you ever get the walnuts from this tree?" To which the man in the tree replied, "Du stam, my friend, don't you understand that I'd shake the branches of this tree not out of hunger, but out of thirst? For I know that there is water below this chasm, and hearing its sound alone satisfies my thirst. For I know that the water below is seeking the one who is thirsty for it, just as I am seeking it." And with those words, the Hoopoe finished its story. And at once, courage came to the queen. Courage came to her to embark on this journey to that distant kingdom where there was a king called Soliman, a king called Solomon the Wise. And she went on this journey all alone, leaving her throne behind. And yet with each step, her doubts became heavier upon her. "How will I go on without my throne?" she said to herself. "How will I find my way without my throne? How will I live without my throne?" And yet despite her doubts, her courage led her along until she arrived at the kingdom of Solomon. And there she saw all the wonders that her ambassador described to her. And when she arrived at the palace of Solomon, she walked down that long corridor to his throne room. And she began to raise her skirts as she approached the throne of King Solomon. And King Solomon smiled at her. "O Queen, I welcome you, but I wonder, why do you raise skirts as you walked down this corridor?" And she explained to the king that she saw that this corridor's floors were covered with water. To which the king smiled at her and said, "My dear queen, don't you see that these floors are not covered with water? These floors, rather, are covered with mirrors. Mirrors that reflect back the very guest I've been waiting to greet on this day." And so Queen Bilquis bowed before the king bowed out of respect. But the king knew in his heart, knew that in her heart she was missing something, and that loss was weighing so heavily upon her. And he smiled at the queen, saying this, "O Queen Bilkis, do not be saddened. For what you have left behind, you will find in my palace." And then he led her towards a curtain. And when he drew the curtain, Queen Bilkis saw that behind that curtain there was nothing other than her own throne. And she cried in amazement, "How can this be? How can this be? How can my throne find itself here when I left it in my far away kingdom?" And to this the king replied, "Your Majesty, O Queen Bilkis, don't you understand that the day that you freed yourself from your throne in turn became free from you? And when your throne became free, it became as light as a feather. And it has been a morning breeze that has swept your throne all the way to my kingdom, all the way to the place where you see it now." And the queen sighed in relief, knowing that where she had found herself would be the place she would remain until the end of her days. And so that's where Queen Bilkis spent the rest of her days, in the magical palace of King Solomon. And her throne was never far away from her, for her throne was nothing other than her presence. Her throne was nothing other than my presence. Her throne was nothing other than the presence of each of you who have listened to this story today. Her throne is nothing other than the presence of every moment of eternity. Beshno az nechon hekayat mikonad, az jodaya shekayat mikonad. Listen to the song of the reed in its weeping, for it tells the story of our separation.